In this video, I'll show you how to make a 100% stacked bar chart for a pivot table, also known as a contingency table or a two-way table. So first we're going to highlight our labels for the rows and columns as well as the middle part of the table. Ignore the grand totals on either side. We don't need that part. Then we're going to go to Insert, a Chart. And immediately we have a chart, but it's not necessarily the one we want or one that actually looks good. So when we look at the chart, we want to make sure that it's showing what we need it to show. So I noticed that I highlighted these numbers, so I have counts of 3 and 4 and 1 and 1 and 3 and 8. And some are for cell phone and tablet, desktop, laptop. And I want to make sure that things have been shown correctly. So if I see the 4 categories across the bottom, okay, I do have 4 categories. I want to make sure that I see 2 categories for each method of accessing the course. So if the person's on a cell phone, I want to see 3 yeses and 0 nos, and that's true. If someone's on a laptop, I want to see 4 nos and 8 yeses. So looking at the table, yep, that looks to be right. You may have to change the labels on the x-axis and then also the title and then also the frequency along the side. So to change title, you can just double click and rename it. Same thing down there. Usually the x-axis is either really right or really wrong. So you may want to rewrite this as what category is someone accessing the course. And then for the legend, up top it can be difficult to read, so you might want to move it over to the right side of the table here. And you can also redo the chart, maybe do some copying and pasting, and then relabel this, because yes and no may not be as descriptive unless you make it a good title and then give it a good subtitle. To get a y-axis label here, in the chart editor, we want to go to the chart and axis titles, and it is the vertical axis here in this drop-down box. We want to give it a title, and it's usually just frequency. So that makes a lot more sense. Okay, so I didn't change the title, but that can be done. So another thing that we may want to do is make a 100% stacked bar chart. This just gives us the counts, but it's not relative to any one category. It's just relative to overall. So I need to change my pivot table so that the inside cells are either a percent of a row or a percent of a column. So if I say percent of row, we're going to get conditional distributions here. So for each of the rows, how do the yeses and nos break down into the 4 different categories? So I'm going to delete this chart. I want to start again. I'm going to highlight my labels, the inside of the table. I can go up to this part up here in the toolbar, insert chart. So here we go, we have a chart, and this is where we often get the really wrong answers or really right answers. So you have to look first for what is the 100%. So the 100% are 2 categories, yeses and nos. So in my stacked bar chart, I need to be able to get to that 100%. So I'm going to go up to the chart editor and change my column, change the chart from column to down here 100% stacked. And I like this because then it's showing my category and then a total of 100%, so I know which category to look at. So my table had categories that were yes and no that totaled to 100%. This has 4, so this is wrong. We need to go down to this part of the chart editor where it says switch rows and columns. And when I uncheck that box, now I do get 2 bars, one for yes, one for no, which matches to my pivot table. And then inside of each bar, you're getting the 4 different colors representing the 4 different categories, so how the person is accessing the course. This is another option where we would want to customize this chart and maybe put the legend over on the right side, a little easier to read. And this is definitely a case for making sure that your x-axis and y-axis labels are nice, as well as the title. So this title's definitely not descriptive of just yes and no. Sometimes your x-axis is spot on, or sometimes it's totally wrong. So our x-axis label looks to be good. Did you eat breakfast this morning? And then the responses were yes and no. And then maybe we'd want to rewrite the title to be something like, how will you be accessing the course by breakfast? Something like that. Okay, let's do another graph. I'm going to go back to my pivot table, and instead of making the pivot table by percent of row, I'm going to do percent of column. So now I have each of the columns totaling to 100%, and then there's just 2 categories within each column. So now over at my 100% stacked bar chart, I need to make sure I have 4 categories across the bottom. So let's go to the chart editor. I double clicked there, and remember that box, switch rows and columns. If we check that box again, now I do see the 4 categories across the bottom. And now my x-axis label is definitely wrong, because did you eat breakfast this morning does not match with the 4 bars across the bottom. So relabel this to say, how will you be accessing the class? And then make sure that the title shows something about eating breakfast, or did you eat breakfast categorized by how you would access the course. So that is what we can do with a pivot table and a 100% stacked bar chart. If you want to unstack the bars, you can go back over to the column chart, and then you'll have them next to each other. But with so many 0 spaces in my pivot table, it's kind of unclear. So I like seeing that 100% and then knowing that that's the total, and then you can compare easily. Let's go back here. You can compare one column to the next and see how the ratio of red to blue changes as you bump from one column to the next.